Can everybody hear me? It's good. I think John is, yes?
Yeah, you can hear me okay? This is good.
Yay.
So we don't have a sort of fancy intro for the Zoom calls. Usually you would be met with enormous fanfare in the JFK Forum, and there'd be hundreds of students packed in from the depths of the forum, and it's scaled in a kind of arena-like all the way up 4 floors high. So if you could just imagine that, you know, in front of you as we get to talking today. I'm Joan Donovan, and I'm the research director at the Shorenstein Center. And this event is put together with a few different folks, including the Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation and the Fairbanks Center for Chinese Studies. But we are so excited to welcome you, Audrey, to this event and to talk with you about disinformation. I'm going to do a little bit of fanfare introduction before we get started, and I know you've prepared an incredible presentation that will help people understand more about Taiwan's new approach to digital democracy. So Audrey Tang is Taiwan's digital minister in charge of social innovation, which we will unpack what a job like that means, especially for public policy students. I think everybody has a dream of doing a job as innovative and as creative as the one that you do. Audrey is known for revitalizing the computer languages of Perl and Haskell, as well as building the online spreadsheet system, EtherCalc, which I think a lot of people, I don't know if they're super happy about that one. It's a lot of work in collaboration with Dan Bricklin. In the public sector, Audrey served on Taiwan's National Development Council's Open Data Committee and the K-12 Curriculum Committee, and led the country's first e-Rulemaking project. And in the private sector, Audrey has worked as a consultant with Apple on computational linguistics, with Oxford University Press on crowd lexicography, and with Socialtext on social interaction design. In the social sector, Audrey is actively contributing to a vibrant community focusing on creating tools for the civil society with a call to, quote unquote, fork the government. And I should say that I am very excited to talk with you tonight because I've also participated in community-driven and civil society-led infrastructure projects. And it's a special kind of nerd that appreciates order and process. And one of the things that has really been perplexing for me as I study disinformation and I'm in this field is I, like you, still am a bit of a techno-optimist, and I want to bring to people the abilities that technology extends to all of us when we use them in ways that are pro-social. And so I'm hoping, of course, too, that as we talk about disinformation and the pandemic, we can also have a little bit of levity and humor. I know you're a big fan of memes, and so I'm very excited to talk to you about that. We run a newsletter called Me More Weekly out of my research team, and we're just obsessed. So without further ado, I want to hand it over to you and let you spend the next, 10 or 15 minutes just really talking about what is going on, especially from the perspective of Taiwan, who, in the U.S., we're in this moment of total political pandemonium, and here Taiwan is approaching the pandemic with a sense of poise and rationality. And so I would love for you to talk a bit about that and about disinformation and the challenge and the opportunities technology provides. Oh, I think you might be muted. So if you could.
Yeah, do you see the cute dog here?
I see them. For sure.
Yeah, okay, good. Right, so this is our counter-disinformation strategy. It's called humor over rumor. And this cute dog here is reminding you to wear a mask to protect yourself from your own unwashed hands. the same cute dog is reminding you to keep 3 Shiba Inus distance when you're indoor and 2 when outdoors, and also cover your mouth and nose when sneezing. And I begin with the cute dog because they're literally our spokesdog of the central epidemic command center. That is how we manage to basically make joy, that is to say humor, have a higher R0 value, that is to say to spread more widely than outrage, which is what the disinformation crisis has been banking on. It's banking on the idea that people who feel individual anger will share them, especially during the time of pandemic, because since ancient times, right, the way to combat pandemic has been making sure that the borders are closed, cities are locked down, the citizens' assembly is suspended, and so on. So mutual distrust seems to be an inevitable outcome. And so people are more eager during a pandemic to blame the spread of a virus, either of the mind or of the body, on outsiders. Those of different races, nationalities, beliefs, and so on, and leading to a more divisive and toxic infodemic that only grows with the pandemic. And this year, we successfully countered both the pandemic and the infodemic, the landslide effect of distrust with this open government, this partnership approach during the fight. And for example, just one example, as the pandemic broke out, face masks and other personal protective equipments were soon in low supply. And so we very quickly adopted a rationing system to ensure fair distribution. And who implements system more than 6,000 pharmacists across the islands, as they not only had professional credentials, but were trusted in their community, in their social sector neighborhoods. And so public trust in pharmacists, although important, was not the whole story. We also work with civic technologies, the GovZero movement in particular, to automate the workflow, to save time for people. So you're looking at a GovZero work, which is the mask availability map. The red ones are the pharmacies that are already out of stock, so don't bother queuing up there. And the green ones still have some in stock, so you can go there and get your masks. And it actually shows the numbers in real time, so that each person queuing after you can actually keep the whole system accountable by just refreshing their phone right after your purchase, so that they can know that first the system works as intended, and also that whether you're purchasing for a children's mask, which is 10 masks per 2 weeks, or for yourself, which is 9 adult masks per 2 weeks at the current rationing stage. And so our government had total faith in this team and worked with more than 100 of them closely to improve the data structure of our National Health Insurance Administration, forming a virtuous cycle through weekly iterations and building upon the agile design thinking informed culture that we cultivated in the past couple of years through presidential hackathons in collaboration with the Open Contracting Partnership. So when Gao Hong'an, MP, a legislator who served as a VP of data analytics at Foxconn, so she knows something about data, and her interpellation session with the Minister Chen Shizhong, she cited numbers from the OpenStreetMap community and said basically that even though it looks like we have an even distribution on the map, it was measuring through kind of kilometer distances on the map. But actually, if you count public transportation for rural areas and people who have less access to cars and so on, it's actually uneven distribution was actually not fair when you count the actual supply and demand, the hours that they must put in to get the facial masks. And Minister Chen, who enjoyed great popularity, did not jump to defend the existing policy at all. Rather, he remarked, "Legislator, teach us," and immediately revise the system. So the day after we revise the system, and people can get their masks through pre-ordering 24 hours a day, and like immediately, instead of just 3/4 of people wearing the mask, which is a bare minimum to keep the R value under 1, we reach around 90%. And Ms. Gao said on Facebook, she said, "In the wake of yesterday's questioning is today's improvement." So to me, the Pygmalion effect is the key to rebuild social trust during the pandemic. The more trust the government has in the citizens, the more trustworthy citizens become. And the digital social innovation, such as the Q spokesdog, the humor over rumor, making viral memes, and also the toll-free number that anyone can call anytime to suggest policy changes. Back in April, I think, there was a young boy who called into the toll-free number 1922 and shared that he didn't want to go to school because when you Russian mask, you don't get to pick the color, and all he had was pink medical masks, and so he was afraid that his classmate may laugh at him for wearing pink. The very next day, in the daily live stream press conference, not only our Minister Chen Shizhong wore pink, everybody wore pink. All the medical officers wore pink, and Minister Chen even said that Pink Panther is my favorite childhood hero or something. And so the boy became the most hip boy in his class because only he has the color of the mask that the heroes wear. And that is gender mainstreaming and also social innovation. And that's also part of our humor over rumor strategy because that humor has a much higher R0 value. And so I just want to end on the note that this timely response didn't come out of nowhere. It comes because we have a legal definition of disinformation, that is to say intentional untruths that does public harm. Instead of harming the image of a minister, which is just good journalism, it harms the public, sowing discord on the foundation of democracy and public health. And anytime we detect that there is such a trending rumor out of people's voluntary flagging and reporting on social media, we just push out those very funny memes. And so in addition to Spokestock, we also have a premier head of the cabinet that is super funny. For example, there was a popular rumor that was before the pandemic that says you'll be fined $1 million for perming your hair repeatedly in a week. And it's not true. Of course, it's not true. But then within an hour, the premier posted his young picture and said, I may be bald now, but I remember having hair. I will not punish people who look like my youth. And a small print that says, what we have introduced is a labeling requirement for hair products. It only takes effect 2021. But the premier, as he looks now with a hair dryer's picture, says, however, even though you will not be fined 1 million, it will hurt your hair if you perm it repeatedly. Just look at me now for what will happen to you. Of course, I don't think he looks the way he looks now because he permed too much hair during his youth. But it's very humorous because he makes fun of himself, not any other people. It's not toxic or divisive, so people can share it without causing fractures in our polity. And so this collaborative checking, we have the GovZero community, the CoFact community to thank because everybody can just long press any like WhatsApp in Taiwan it's called Line message and forward it into this crowdsourced collective intelligence, and then professional journalists work together with the international fact-checking network, the Pointers Network, to basically look at the most trending rumors even before they make it its way to the public social media when it's still in the more closed groups for A/B testing. So the end result is that we have a very good social norm that we collectively say, hey, during the election, you need to declare your campaign donations and expenditure. And we see from the raw data, open data published by our auditing agency that the social media advertisements in 2018 was not declared mostly as campaign donations and expenditure. So we went to Facebook saying, look, you have two choices. You can either continue to run those foreign-sponsored election micro-targeting campaigns violating our social norm and face social sanction, which could be deadly in Taiwan. Or you can comply with our social norm and declare exactly in your advertisement library the kind of campaign donation and expenditure formats that our control yuan uses for auditing for other sorts of campaign donation, and of course block foreign campaign donations, foreign sponsored propaganda, and then just be honest with your advertisement. They chose the later, and in this January's presidential election, I think we're the first jurisdiction for Facebook to deploy this kind of norm-informed regulation because, well, they're a governor after all. And so having a good partner in negotiation is important because at the time, our journalists, our social sector has already come to rough consensus on the political contributions and the norms around it. And so I would just finish with three fact checks from the Taiwan Fact Check Center. Each of them is numbered, so you can see the full detail themselves. The first one is a few months after, before the election, because the Hong Kong situation is shaping to being the main issue. So we see this intentionally, deliberately spreading in the Taiwanese social media and trying to paint the Hong Kong protesters as basically people paid to kill police, and which is absurd, of course. But they have this caption that says, and I quote, "The 13-year-old thug bought new iPhones and now he is recruiting his brothers." And this is, of course, not true. But how do we counter it? In many nearby Asian jurisdictions, we'll do a administrative takedown, but we don't do that. We do a notice and public notice. So Reuters, working with the International Fact Check Network, first said it's actually their photo. They actually took that photo. It's a Reuters photo. But the original caption only says, "A teenage extraction bill protester is seen during a march." It was a very neutral caption. So somebody added the false caption to it. And who is that somebody? The Taiwan Fact Check Center traced it to the Weibo account of Chang'an Jian, which is the central political and law unit of the Communist Party in the PRC regime. And so instead of taking anything down, we just make sure that in your social media feed, if you see this false caption, there's always a footnote in it that says, according to the Taiwan Fact Check Center, this is sponsored by the Zhongyang Zhifahui Chang'an Sword in their Weibo accounts, and basically state-sponsored propaganda. And without violating freedom of speech, we make sure that everybody learns that there is something fishy going on in reusing this Reuters photo. And there was also another disinformation right at the election day that says the CIA is always the CIA, who made 2 special inks for the ballots. So no matter who you vote, your vote will disappear during the counting, and Tsai will just magically win because the special ink will appear. And again, the way is through radical transparency. The YouTubers from both sides, and each of them with a very good app, the Han camp is called the 穿云箭, and the Tsai camp is called the 鹰眼部队. Actually, we display the counting publicly, and all the YouTubers can film the counting like one by one and report that on their app. So if there is something fishy going on, those popular YouTubers will detect it firsthand, and that's how we win back trust by, again, more radical transparency, not takedowns. And finally, of course, during the pandemic, one of the most spread disinformation is that you can just share a post, share your personal detail, and get a box of mask. But instead, of course, if you share, you will get a computer virus instead. So, of course, the way to counter that has been the mask map. When people see before their own eyes, refresh every 30 seconds, that citizens are trusted with open data, and that we're actually really ramping up mass production from 2 million a day to 20 million a day, then people actually remain calm and collected even during the pandemic. So that's my sharing, and I'll stop right here and look forward to a conversation with you.
Excellent, excellent. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I think my computer might have frozen, but meanwhile, oh, no, I think things are moving. Okay, we're back.
That's right.
Yeah, such a weird situation on my computer today. Never have any tech problems until today. So, yeah, thank you so much for that presentation. I have a whole set of notes, and then I also had prepared some questions. But one of the things that I'm really interested in is something potentially a little bit more personal from you, is trying to understand a bit about how you ended up where you are, specifically in this role in the government, and how does your past activism and your technology skills, how does that end up informing the space that you are now occupying as the digital minister?
Sure. That's a great question. And as you noted on the introduction, unlike many people today, I'm really an optimist. And in public sector innovation, I think public servants, bureaucrats are the most innovative people. And I admit it's a strange condition not shared by many. And this strange condition began when I was 15 years old. That was 96. The year of Taiwan's first presidential election. And I discovered that the future of human knowledge is on the web, and my textbooks were all out of date. state compared to the ARXIV, the archive.org website by Cornell University. They're still around, right? So I told my teachers that I want to quit school and start my education on the Wild Web. Surprisingly, the head of my school agreed with it and said, from tomorrow on, you don't have to go to the middle school anymore, and I will cover to you, meaning that the head of school will fake the records for me. Of course, this is very innovative, right? So a year later, I founded a startup working on web technologies, and I get to join this fabulous internet society that runs with this crazy idea, an open multi-stakeholder political system that still powers the core of the internet to this day. I look forward to join the APR IGF and to share that part of the story. And so as Taiwan's digital minister, I become the digital minister because essentially we occupied the parliament for 3 weeks during 2014. That's called the Sunflower Movement in protest of the lack of substantial deliberation when forming a trade and service deal with Beijing. And because the MPs were on strike, the people took their seats to do their work for them. That was our legitimacy theory. And so more than 20 different NGOs each deliberated on one aspect of the CSSTA. For example, one side deliberated whether we need to admit any of those so-called private sector company in our then new 4G infrastructure. Nowadays, it's called Clean Pass, right? Part of the Clean Network thing. But back then, we're the first jurisdiction that reached a consensus on the street that if the state wants from the PRC, they can just swap leadership for any private sector company through their party branches. So we should not actually admit their components into our 4G infrastructure because the overall cost of reassessing the political risk for each upgrade will be too high. It doesn't make a business sense. So we reached that consensus in 2014. And actually, the rough consensus showed people that this demonstration is not just a protest, it's a demo of a way to listen at scale. And the National Communication Commission actually agreed with us. And so by 2015 and 16, actually, there's no infrastructure part in 4G, now 5G, that come from PRC anymore. We're happy that the US and other people are waking up to the fact. And so anyway, the point here is that people have shown that the social sector has deliberative power and earned the legitimacy. And that's why I call myself the digital minister, but working with, not for the government. I'm at this Lagrange point between the movement on one side and the government on the other, and trying to make sure that I take all the sides and facilitate conversation, but without basically any top-down approaches such as lockdowns or takedowns.
Mm-hmm. No, and I really admire the approach. I think that there was a lot of promise, as specifically around 2010, 2011, as folks were really coming into social media. We're learning about the possibilities of what that technology could bring and how it could network different people, bring different people's issues into the fore. But somewhere along the way, American, US activists in particular tried to build their own infrastructure, tried to replicate Facebook, tried to replicate Twitter, tried to move people off of these corporate platforms and into spaces that would allow them to have a little bit more freedom and push back, and then wouldn't be subject to any kind of censorship from the corporations and surveillance as well. Is there something specific about the way in which technology and democracy were reimagined post the Sunflower Movement that really speaks to this ability for Gov0 to really thrive in a space where corporate infrastructure would really want to take over and say, yeah, we can provide the sort of backbone of communication for the governments, let us at it. But it seems like there's something important here about the way in which people not only participate in democracy, but also know how the technology is being made, and feel as if they can participate in the building and the creation of it. And so that was a poorly formed question, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on how those things came together in Taiwan, specifically because in the US, I've seen activists really, once they start to feel the power of corporate social media, they immediately want something that they own on their own. But of course, we know infrastructure is expensive and it's messy. And so how do you overcome that with the Gov0 project?
Yeah, that's a great question. So right after the sunflower movement, a minister, Jacqueline Tsai, reached out to the community, actually participating in our hackathon, and asked the question, a very important question, that we're now deliberating what to do with telework, but we can't find a union of teleworkers, which is natural. And they also want to deliberate why do Taiwanese startups all register in Cayman Islands, not Taiwan? But they also didn't have an association of people in Taiwan who set up their companies in Cayman Islands. So it's basically things that ask for a presentation of what's going on without any existing structure for representation for what's going on. And so we built that deliberation structure together, and it's called V-Taiwan. And the Uber conversation, I think, was the most reported. It's featured on MIT Tech Review and so on. Basically because I think Minister Jacqueline Tsai at the time understood that it's only possible for people to get the idea that we understand the algorithm, the accountability, the data, the open source components, can people assign legitimacy to the new process? Because the old process, understand that at the time of sunflower movement, the cabinet, including Minister Jacqueline Tsai, only had like around 9% of approval rating. And so, well, it can't go anywhere but up. And when they're building legitimacy, getting Facebook in as the preferred vendor may not be the best strategy when you're at around 9% of approval rating. And so we ended up building the system as an open source system, and it's still going on. I mean, the Polis system that we used back in 2015 to deliberate UberX is now polis.gov.tw, so a proper government organ. At /Ocean, we just concluded 5 consultations on our ocean policy, and it visualizes your friends and family's attitude and positions. And there was the actual UberX conversation around the same facts, but people may feel differently. Right, and I think Jacqueline Tsai understood the importance because she was head of legal affairs in IBM Asia before joining the cabinet. And at the time, I'm also working with Apple, and so both IBM and Apple share something that. In that we don't rely on advertisement and our main revenue. And so we understand this on-premise, essentially let people run the infrastructure is very important. And also the best idea are the idea that take care of most people's feelings so that we can turn it into regulations. So the actual open source interface looks like this. And unlike Facebook, there is no reply button. So when you see that my opinion, my feeling is that liability insurance for UberX is very important. If you agree, you move closer to me. If you disagree, you move farther away from me. And then you can share your own reflections for other people to agree or disagree. But there's no reply button, so you can't troll me. Literally, you can't troll me. And so every time we run Polis, we end up with this shape, which might be the most important slide I shared today. There's, of course, ideological statements. What's a sharing economy? Is a non-carpooling company even a sharing economy? But we just probably ignore those. And then people actually all agree on terms of fair taxation and insurance and registration and so on. And these are the consensus statements. It's the shape of the polity. People discover that each of them agree with most of their neighbors on most of the things most of the time. And this conversation was run, this particular screenshot was from Bowling Green, Kentucky. So it works in the US too. It doesn't have to be Taiwan. Whether people identify as a Democrat or Republican, pretty much everybody in Bowling Green agree that the arts should be an important part. Instead of STEM education, we should teach STEAM education. And look, everybody agrees with that. And so they can very easily implement this without getting tangled up in those ideological statements. So this is what I call pro-social media when it's operated by the social sector instead of anti-social media.
And it's a really great point. Siva Varadarajan's book on anti-social media is something that I often think about when I'm trying to understand, well, why are we going to social media to try to understand something about society when social media tends to present itself like a funhouse mirror? Everything is somewhat distorted. And in a lot of ways, when you do go out and start to talk to people, you realize, man, people aren't that convicted about their feelings, right? There are ways and there are things they're willing to budge on. And I love the, the user-centered design around no reply button, which cuts down on the ability for people to make personal attacks, to derail the conversation, to continuously put forth their idea, over and above any other conversation or ideas that are happening. And I think, the reason why I enter this conversation through the lens of movements and through the lens of this history of technology and democracy is because I do want to remember that in some instances, perhaps not in the US right now, there are alternatives to the way in which we use internet technologies, the way in which we design platforms, and public policy is a really important field where we need to open up those kinds of pro-social innovations and move towards consensus and transparency. And so I want to get to a little bit about the pandemic response. I think disinformation played a role both in how you handled the response and how the US responded. And one of the things that your presentation really showed me is very quickly, Taiwan knew that there was a threat and decided to do something about it right out the gate. And then as people were realizing that rumors were going to drive people's behavior and produce what we call the tragedy of the commons, right? That some people were going to go and buy all of the things like masks in the US, that was toilet paper and hand sanitizer. And so there was none of that available to folks in need. And that kind of panic buying, it was really about supply chain management. I mean, the way that you show that, they have pharmacies and stores have stock, they keep track of stock, everything in the store is networked. And so the approach to supply chain management in opening up that transparency does really cut down on the panic buying. And so can you talk a little bit more in depthly about, so this is all happening and people are saying, well, I need to get the masks. It's going to be important that I have the masks. How are you managing in the moment what to focus on, right? That there's different options for dealing with this problem, but were there some things that were already either examples from the past or things that you had recently worked on that made you think the pharmacies are going to be important and let's focus on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, so first of all, we were able to respond the first day this year, actually, was because, of course, the whistleblower, Dr. Li Wenliang from Wuhan, who told people on their social media that there's 7 new SARS cases in the Huanan seafood market. And he literally saved the Taiwanese people. And we thank him for that. And there was a young doctor, I think a day after Li Wenliang posted his message, shared Li Wenliang's message in PTT, which is the not-for-profit run by National Taiwan University, the Taiwanese equivalent of Reddit. And so because this doesn't serve the advertisement's interest, this gets upvoted purely on the merit of the whistleblowing. And our medical officers noticed that immediately. And then we began health inspections for flights passengers from Wuhan. And I think that's because we have the most open, according to the Human Rights Watch Group, Civicus Monitor, the most open civil society in the whole of Asia. And because of that, what does social sector focus on? We focus on. And that's why the toll-free number 1922 is so important, because it's a call center that hooks into this huge knowledge base that let us know what the society focus on right now. So I would just use one particular example, because you mentioned tissue papers, right? So right after we published our entire supply chain, letting people see that we're ramping up the mass production from 2 million a day to 20 million a day, and you can collect it 24 hours in your nearby friendly convenience store, there's immediately a rumor that says, because the country is now nationalizing mask production, all the tissue papers will run out because all the materials that's going to the mass production line was actually the tissue paper production material, and so you will have zero tissue paper soon because all of them has been repurposed to make masks. And so we detected that through the COFAX channels for people who flag that as potential disinformation. And within a couple of hours, we published this humor over rumor. So you have seen our premier's front side, but this is his backside. And then he wiggles his bottom a little bit and say in huge font that each of us only have one pair of buttocks. And so basically, it doesn't make sense to stockpile. It's a wordplay because in Mandarin, to stockpile twin is the same sound as the homonym to but twin. So by literally making himself the butt of a joke, he made sure that this system would spread a message. People will share the message. It's hilarious. And remember this table, which says that the tissue papers are made out of South American materials, and the mask, which is actually plastic products, are made out of domestic materials. And this is what people end up remembering. And after 2 days of panic buying, the panic buying just died down, and people resumed the usual way of buying tissue papers. So just look at what people are flagging as spam, basically, and keep a close eye and pre-clear your likeness and images if you're a leader in the government for the professional comedians to just roll out these memes in no time.
Now, well, let's dig in a bit to humor over rumor, because obviously the slogan itself has a mimetic quality. And before we dig in, I got to know, what's your favorite meme? Like, where do you go when you need a meme check? Do you have one in particular?
Mm-hmm. Yes, and that's going to be Zongchai. Otherwise, I will not share it to you at the beginning of my talk. This cute dog is the companion animal of the participation officer of the Ministry of Health and Welfare. You see, we have parliamentary officers that interact with MPs. We have press officers that interact with the media. But in each ministry, there's also a team of participation officers that interacts with hashtags, any trending hashtag. And so the Ministry of Health and Welfare participation officer literally lives with this dog, this Shiba Inu. And so anytime the CECC have a new policy like social distancing, the participation officer, because they live quite closely to the building of MOHW, just go back home and take a new photo of the dog. It doesn't even need to pay Shutterstock and just make new memes like within minutes.
I love that. I love that you've thought of this strategy as, because one of the things that is tricky about disinformation, well, number one, what's tricky is it's meant to trick you, right? It is actually manipulation, right? But what drives sharing behavior online has to do with outrage, humor, the emotive capacity that we have to feel that makes us want to do something different. And so I really love this strategy. I think it works well in instances where there is more trust built between the people making the memes and social institutions and those then downstream or folks that are going to share and participate in it. And so let me ask you a bit about this, use of memes in countering disinformation. How might something like that be adapted or adopted in other situations? I mean, is it the case that this stuff, this kind of humor over rumor works really well in terms of medical misinformation, but does it not do so well in terms of political disinformation? Or is the field pretty wide open at this stage where people interacting with disinformation can be, can be persuaded to think differently, if not, have their position changed with humor. But are there places where maybe it just doesn't work?
Yeah, we know it works on the medical one, including hair perming, right? I just show you that. There's a entire political party in Mandarin. It's called 欢乐无法党. Literally, the unstoppable happy party. I think the official English name is Can't Stop This Party. And all the party members are professional YouTubers, stand-up comedians, and things like that. And their logo is literally the YouTube logo, but with the triangle rotated a little bit to point down. Anyway, it's hilarious. And they have experienced a lot of humor over rumor on the sort of political parts that you talked about. For example, the ideas of like death penalty, capital punishment, which is a hotly controversial topic in Taiwan. One of the party members did this whole stand-up sketch around that managed to actually get people to think differently. And so I think I wouldn't say that there's no limit to applying the humor over rumor, but I would say that if you keep the humor like highbrow, like non-toxic, not personally attacking, inclusive instead of excluding parts of the society, then it will apply to a surprisingly wide, broad set of issues. And of course, feel free to explore this together.
No, I think I agree with you. You know, most of the U.S. strategies around disinformation have been about getting journalists to adopt different practices, and that perhaps in you know, some might say there's too open a field for what counts as press in the United States, where we have political pundits posing as journalists, we have foreign operatives using journalism as a cover. In Taiwan, when you're thinking about disinformation, where is it coming from? You gave the one example of being able to source things back to, you said the PRC, but where is the preponderance of the disinformation coming from in you know, through what you know about?
Yeah. First of all, I think disinformation, that is the intentional untrue message that causes public harm, often source from misinformation. That is to say, unintentional, like people are just speculating. There may be some beginning of conspiracy theories, but it was not intentional. It's still untruths that cause public harm, but it was not intentional. It was just essentially people making up theories. And it's a symptom, not a, because it's not intentional, right? It's a symptom of the lack of trust between people and the journalistic institutions, and between journalistic institutions and the scientific and governance institutions. And that's very well understood, so I would not repeat the textbook analysis. But what I want to say is that usually people say something about media literacy when analyzing this situation. But in Taiwan, we officially replaced that with last year when our new K-12 curriculum is rolled out. We don't say media literacy anymore. We say media competence, because literacy assumes that people are passively absorbing information in terms of radio or television or things like that. And that's a last century's metaphor. Nowadays, any random primary schooler may have more followers on Instagram than I do, right? Because I don't really do Instagram. But anyway, the point here is that everybody is, in a sense, a media or even a news caster. Now, whether they are a journalist or not, depending on whether they get proper journalistic mindset, whether they have the competence of being a journalist, including checking the sources and so on. And so we start teaching that by example at the beginning of the first year in primary school. I think that really is the key to make sure that teachers, instead of handing out standardized answers, encourage their children to become kind of like amateur journalists that fact checks the presidential debate and speech. Leading up to our presidential election, many middle schoolers and even some primary schoolers participate in this, like thousands of people fact-checking each and every statement by the three presidential candidates, and that's a great example. And the citizens initiatives too were essentially like civics class assignments, so that people way before they get to the legal age of voting can feel that they can already start meaningful social change without being constrained by the existing media channels. And before long, they form alliances with real investigative journalists who can essentially crowdsource their information and work with the citizenry instead of just for the citizenry.
That's a really, it's a really interesting point to think about, if you start people young, understanding media, not necessarily as a thing that tells you what to do and what to think, you don't just go and check the weather, but you try to get a sense of what the whole set of information looks like, and then you start to figure out what reputable sources are and how that works. Do you think that there's a difference then in Taiwan with that approach, given the fact that people have had trouble, being able to support a free press, as well as have had deep skepticism about government, especially in terms of, in 2014 with the very, underhanded way in which the government tried to push through policy with the lack of transparency? Do you think there's something maybe specific about the history of democracy and the relationship of citizens to government in Taiwan, and as well as the challenges that the free press has faced, that potentially put them in a better position to handle disinformation than societies where media literacy has not been exactly at the forefront of our education, and then also the way in which the corporate version of social media and platforms tends to make it difficult to actually get to the bottom of sources and to do that fact checking?
Yeah, I think so, yes. Just like everybody above 30 years old remember the SARS 1.0, which was the 2003, and we did lock down unannounced a entire hospital, the Heping Hospital. It was very traumatic, and the municipal and central government was saying completely different things. It was very chaotic. 37 people died directly because of SARS 1.0. And so in Taiwan, everybody, when we hear that Dr. Li Wenliang is whistleblowing that there's 7 new SARS cases, rings this alarm bell in everybody's mind. And we collectively think, okay, this time we're going to get 3/4 of people wearing medical masks prompt without having to go back to lockdown, because lockdown was very traumatic. And so it's a collective memory that prompts people to innovate, because the second best choice isn't very good. And so the same for people who are above my age, like I'm the last generation that remember the martial law. So I still remember the martial law because my parents were both journalists, and they had to censor themselves endlessly during the martial law because there was no freedom of press. And so it was bad old days. People don't want to go back to the martial law. And whenever there's any argument about, for example, like administrative takedown of media or things like that, it would be a non-starter if the counter argument is just, you want us to go back to the martial law days? And then that idea wouldn't even fly. And so I think we're basically peer pressured to innovate this fast, fair, fun principle, this humor over rumor strategy, simply because we cannot imagine going back to either the takedown or the lockdown. And that's because the democracy in Taiwan is, we fought very hard, and by we, I mean my parents' generation, grandparents' generation, fought very hard for the freedom of press, and we don't want to go back to the bad old days.
No, and I completely appreciate that, because, I think that sometimes, as we're navigating disinformation and trying to make sense of it, there's ways in which we want to rely on technology to fix it, but we know ultimately that it's a socio-technical problem, that we actually have to change behaviors and expectations of people. And then we also have to change the way that they use technology and how technology, quote unquote, uses them as data and as property in the US at least. And I think that public policy has a strong role to play in that. And I think that, the way in which you have been able to enliven a citizenry who's excited about participating, that might participate in a meme war here and there, and loves to, troll some of those in power, albeit gently, and that the stakes feel different for people in Taiwan, because there is still a lot of living memory of the kinds of suppression and oppression that has been faced in the past and that you continue to deal with. And I want to ask a bit about some of the more vulnerable groups in Taiwan, LGBTQ, different racial and ethnic minorities, as well as religious minorities. How are they thinking about technology right now? How are they using it? Is it working? Are they able to have a voice in this new democracy?
Yes, that's a great question. I regularly tour around Taiwan to the most remote, rural, and offshore island places, specifically to participate in their town halls on their terms, staying for a couple of days on a ethnographic or just hanging out with people and understand the world from their worldview. And I get to do this because there is nothing constituency in me means very differently in a parliamentarian cabinet. Although I'm a cabinet member, I'm twice appointed, right? People vote for the president directly, who appoints the premier, who appoints me. And so I see my main constituent as people who don't vote, people who are 16 years old, people who are immigrant workers, people who have to, work their way to be included in the policy making ideas. And so actually, right after this talk, I'm going back to my office, which is the Social Innovation Lab in Taipei. I can share this with you. It looks literally like this. It's a park. We tore down the walls. Anyone can walk in and bring their ideas and talk directly to me. And also, when I tour around Taiwan, this also serves as a place for the 12 ministries to listen collectively on the kind of video stream that I bring from the rural and remote places, because in Taiwan, broadband is a human right. So no matter how remote you are, even on the top of the Yushan, almost 4,000 meters high, you still have 10 megabits per second for just $16 per month, unlimited data connection. Otherwise, it's my fault personally. And so we always have a good kind of video link back to the central government. And this is what the Social Innovation Lab represents. And also, like this, I think is the mayor of Prague from Czech, a pirate. His party is literally a pirate party, and having a lot of fun. And people bring their pets. Self-driving vehicles too. I think these are from Boston, from the MIT. And so people just experiment with all sorts of co-domestication of emerging technologies, because just as you pointed out, when we say technology, we always think industrial innovation, but there's also a social aspect of it. There's a social innovation aspect of it, but only through open innovation, open data and such can people experiment with different configurations of self-driving tricycles and to make sure that they adhere to the social norms. So in SDG terms, that's effective partnership. And so I think responding to your question, the main idea that we're making sure that the LGBT, the marginalized community and so on are included is by specifically letting them set the agenda of when and what to talk about and meet them in the here and now, instead of asking them to upvote the central government-centric consultations. We ask what their agenda are, and for the central government to, on the social innovation tour, respond to them in the here and now, and sometimes with the kind of cultural translators of the indigenous community. So you see the 12 different ministries listening there, and you see me, I think it was in Hualien, one of the more remote places, working with the town hall. So it's called the social innovation tours. I can go on for hours, but I understand we only have 3 more minutes.
3 more minutes, but this is, I feel like I've been on a world tour. I'm so excited to see what you come up with. But I do want to wrap up around Taiwan Can Help Us, which is a site an initiative that you all have put together. And I know that there's a lot more to be learned about both your pandemic response and your ability to stay open, and the leadership necessary in order to bring a country together around a set of prescriptions about their behaviors, to say, hey, you're going to be able to get masks, you're going to be able to do this, but that actually requires governments and not politicians, right? The politicians are running a race, whereas governance is a whole different job. It's after you win, you really have to focus in and do the hard work of governance. And so I'd love for you to conclude around this initiative that you've been working on. And, you know, in the U.S., I know it's, you know, what's great about Harvard Kennedy School, I should say, is that people come from all over the world. And so if you could just explain a bit about this new initiative and then get on a plane, fly over here and fix everything, I'd be happy to host you. But maybe the second part's too tall of an order, but please talk to us about TaiwanCanHelp.us.
Sure. We're now connecting through the speed of light. So in a sense, I'm already there. In Mandarin digital, 数位 also means plural. So there's now a plural of digital ministers, one copy in your screen and one copy here. So the initiative can see it. It's called Taiwan Can Help Us. And it's not a government initiative, by the way. It's just started by random YouTubers. But we did get our top epidemiologist at the time, the person who literally wrote a textbook on epidemiology, to record an massive online open course, which is in English too. So feel free to subscribe in Taiwan Can Help Us. So that become a very good kind of YouTuber from a professional epidemiologist who happens to be also our vice president at the time. So when our science authority want to talk to our political authority, you know, he just has to look into the mirror. And then that, of course, makes things easier. And I also want to share with you my job description, which I think helps to steer the conversation around technology to be less about the industry, but more about the social and environmental and this more holistic part of reliable data, effective partnerships, and open innovation. So my job description, which is also pinned on Twitter, goes like this. When we see the Internet of Things, let's make it an Internet of Beings. When we see virtual reality, let's make it a shared reality. When we see machine learning, let's make it collaborative learning. When we see user experience, let's make it about human experience. And whenever we hear that the singularity may be near, let us always remember the plurality is right here. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. That sentiment very much warms my heart, and I'm definitely going to be writing and thinking a lot about collective intelligence and rough consensus as we go on here. And so just want to thank you for joining us and being part of this. At the end of the forum events, everybody gets a standing ovation. So I'll stand up and say thank you. I really appreciate it. And as always, with Harvard Kennedy School, we'll make good on having you back and treating you like a good guest. So thank you so much. And thank you to Ali and Ava and May for hanging on and doing all the infrastructure work. And we look forward to the next conversation. Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Live long and prosper.
You got it.